Hi and welcome back to the channel. Now if you are flying your DJI Lito X1 over water, it can give you some absolutely stunning summer footage, but it can also end disaster faster than you can say, where's my drone? So in this video I'm going to show you how you can safely fly your drone over water, how the GPS and the sensors actually behave, the biggest causes of crashes, how wind can catch you out, and why using quick shots near water can be one of the worst ideas that you have. Now, I'm also going to cover the minimum safety height for flying the drone over water, 8 essential safety tips, as I said, how the GPS and the sensors really work, and why most DJI Lito crashes happen, the wind risks and the battery drain, and also why quick shots can be extremely dangerous over water. And finally, I'm going to carry on with the best camera settings on your DJI Lito to get the most when you are flying over water. Now, if you live somewhere like me, South Wales, you're already going to be used to wall-to-wall sunshine, low winds and perfect flying conditions for 365 days of the year. And if you are from South Wales, then you'll understand that. And if it is your first time here, my name's Andrew, and if it's not your first time here, well, you already know that it is Andrew. And before we get into things to do with flying the drone over the water, if you could do the like, subscribe, notification bell thing, because it does really help the channel and I would appreciate it massively. Now, with the sun finally deciding to make an appearance and with summer literally just around the corner, the chances are that you will want to take your DJI Lito away and fly it over water. But before you do, watching this video may help you just keep your drone rather than losing it to Poseidon. Because what looks like the perfect cinematic shot can turn the drone shot into a complete loss. Because you could have a calm sea and it looks safe, or a perfect lake reflection and that looks easy, but flying the drone over water is exactly where a lot of beginner pilots make the very expensive mistakes. So first of all, you need to understand why water is so deceptive. And this is because the DJI Lito relies on 3 things when shooting to work properly. First one is going to be visual texture, the second is going to be a stable GPS signal, and the third is going to be predictable flying conditions. Now, normally over land, your drone sees things like grass, rocks, paths, buildings, and there's a lot of visual information. But over water, you suddenly lose all of that. And this is because over water, you're not going to have any visual reference points. The optical flow accuracy, especially on reflective surfaces, is going to be reduced, and reliable depth perception is also going to go out the window. And that's usually where the problem starts. Now, the drone may be clever, but it's not actually magic. So the first thing you need to look at is going to be the minimum safe height over water. And this is one of the questions I do get asked a lot. Now, legally in the UK, there is no minimum specific height for flying over water, but you really should have a smart operational minimum. And personally, I like to do that around about 5 to 10 meters. And the rule is really the higher the better for the drone. Now, if you are a beginner, I would say then you need to fly really maybe 10 to 20 meters above the water to give yourself plenty of room. Only attempt those low cinematic skim shots once you've got a lot more experience and confidence. And always leave a safety buffer for gusts of winds, because if you are flying too low, sudden gusts of winds can actually push the drone down. And also sensor accuracy drops near reflective surfaces. And if you do happen to fly below 5 meters, the risk of a sudden splashdown does massively increase. And trust me, if you have got your drone and some water, they're not going to mix particularly well. You also need to consider what the drone is doing in the background. Now, the DJI Lito X1 uses 3 key systems. Number 1 is going to be GPS positioning, and this connects satellites to hold the drone steady in the air. But the GPS isn't perfect. There's always going to be a slight delay, and the tolerance is round about 1 to 2 meters in accuracy. This means that the drone can actually drift in stronger winds, and if you are flying over water, there are going to be fewer correctional clues. So don't assume that the drone is locked in place and nailed to the sky, because ultimately it isn't. The second one is going to be the visual positioning system, and this uses the downward facing cameras to see the surface underneath the drone. Now, over land this works brilliantly, but over water not so much. Reflections can actually confuse the sensors, moving waves can reduce the accuracy, and sometimes if you are flying low enough, the system, for a better term really, will lose confidence. And this means that the drone can drift a lot more than you would expect. Number 3 is going to be the obstacle avoidance. Now, yes, the Lito X1 does have sensors all around, and they work best with solid, obvious objects like trees and buildings. Everything's going to be fine. But then when you've got things like thin poles or fishing lines or glass, it doesn't work so well. So the obstacle avoidance is there to assist you, but not to replace you. And the bottom line is this: the drone is smart, but not over water. So you really do need to fly smarter when you are flying over any sort of liquid. So with this in mind, there are 8 things you can consider before you actually take off. The first one is going to be the wind. Now the wind behaves completely differently over water, and I'm going to come on to that more in a second. The second one is going to be the return to home altitude. So you need to make sure that's set properly, because even though you haven't got any trees out to sea, you may have obstacles when the drone's coming back in. And this did happen to one of the subscribers recently, and you can see their comments maybe up there. So always bear in mind trees, cliffs, buildings, or anything that is on the shoreline, because if the signal does drop and the drone does come back automatically, you don't want the drone crashing into any objects. Third one is don't fly straight out to sea immediately. Instead, try flying parallel to the shore first. That way you're always going to have an escape route if something does start to go wrong. Number 4, and this goes for all drone flights, is always maintain visual line of sight. Now, if you can barely see the drone when it is flying, especially somewhere as tropical as this, then you're going to be increasing the risk of losing it. Number 5, don't trust the battery percentage alone. Now, the battery will drain a lot faster when it's over water, and especially in wind. The 6th one is going to be avoid using the automatic modes in risky areas, especially things like quick shots, and again I'll go on to that more in a few moments. Number 7 is going to be use smooth stick inputs only. Don't try any aggressive turns, don't do any sudden yawing, try and avoid any jerky movements, because slow and smooth footage does always look better anyway. And because of this, you may be better off using cruise control, and if you want to know more about cruise control, there is a video up here. And then number 8 is to plan your exit route before you take off. Before the drone even leaves the ground, you need to know exactly where you're going to bring it back to. Another thing you need to consider is where you actually take off from. Now, you want to avoid taking off from the sand, because obviously that means that you could get sand into the motors of the drone, and that can cause a lot of problems when you're out, because the sand could jam the motors and the drone's just going to crash into the water. Another thing is try and avoid taking off from moving platforms, especially things like boats, because again what will happen is as the boat drifts, if something happens, maybe the return to home is initiated, when the drone comes back, the drone is not going to go straight to the boat, because obviously the boat has moved, and again you run the risk of the drone crashing, or you trying to fly the drone back onto the boat, and then you could have problems with rigging or people on the vessel as well. So if possible, try and always take off from land. Now, even if you take all of those into consideration, it doesn't mean that your drone's not going to crash, because most crashes over water aren't due to technical failures. It's likely due to either wind misjudgment, because as I said, the wind is going to be stronger over water and less predictable, and it's usually massively underestimated. The second one is going to be loss of orientation, because when you are flying over water, well, everything is just going to be more water. So suddenly judging distance becomes more difficult, and if you put too much confidence in the GPS, that is also going to cause problems, because people assume that it's just going to hold position, and that's not going to be the case. Because of the reflections coming off the surface of the water, again, it can confuse the sensors on the drone. And then the third one you got is going to be battery miscalculation. Now, one of the issues you've got with winds is that when you are flying the drone out to sea, there's nothing there to slow the wind down. And this means that gusts can actually occur a lot more frequently and unexpectedly. Also, the direction changes when you're near cliffs and coastlines. And I know from experience that when I used to sail, you could actually see the gusts actually coming across the surface of the water, but with a drone, you're not going to be able to get that warning. And that's going to be a classic mistake. Another one is you don't want to fly out with a tailwind. Always fly out with a headwind, because with a tailwind, everything feels easy, the drone feels fast, the battery looks fine. The minute you turn it around and you start to bring it back into a headwind, the drone's going to slow down, the battery power is going to start dropping, the motors are going to have to work harder, and then suddenly, before you know it, you haven't got enough battery to bring the drone back safely. And that's how a lot of drones are going to get lost. So here, the golden rule is always start flying into a headwind. That way, the easier flight is always going to be the one coming home. And always assume that the return flight may use 30 to 40% of the battery. So personally, I tend to have the drone coming back when I've got round about 50% of the battery left, just so I know I've got a little bit of a buffer zone to get the drone back safely. Another thing to consider is, do you really need that far out to sea shot? Because honestly, it is just a lot of water, and generally it does end up being a really boring shot because there's no detail, so there's nothing to see. You're much better having the drone closer into land, filming a coastline, and that's going to be more visually interesting. And before I go on to the quick shots, if you could do like, subscribe, notification bell and the hype, that would be greatly appreciated. They do really matter to the algorithm, and it does help the channel grow. And there's also an option there for buy me a coffee, and if you'd like to do that, any funds are going to go back towards new equipment for the channel to obviously help me grow and to give you more information. So again, that would be greatly appreciated. Now that bit's done, as I said, it's going to be quick shots. Now, quick shots are the quickest and easiest way to get really good footage from the drone. But near water, I would really avoid using them. And this is basically because they can rotate quite aggressively. The altitude changes can also have an effect, and you do tend to ignore your manual timing. And this means that flying over water does become a lot riskier, because you do tend to lose the perception, and the obstacle avoidance may not react properly, and the drone can actually drift during the automatic flights. So worst case scenario of this would be that you're, say, maybe doing a droney, the drone goes out, it catches a gust of wind, all of a sudden things start to go sideways literally. There's not enough reference points for the drone to latch onto. It starts to come back, the sensors get confused by the deflection of the water on the sand. Again, it drifts, and before you know it, you've lost the drone. So I would honestly recommend not using quick shots or master shots anywhere near water. Using a manual flight is going to be much safer, and it's also going to look a lot better anyways. And as I said, don't forget wet sand, because wet sand can also act like a mirror, and it will make things a lot worse. Also, because unlike waves, wet sand doesn't move, so there's going to be less texture, and that again will confuse the sensors. So if you decided then to ignore all this advice and you still want to fly over water, then there are a couple of camera settings that you need to consider. So this is going to be subjective and relates to exactly what you want. So first of all, the frame rate. So generally maybe 4K at 30 frames a second, because this is going to give you a lot of detail, and it is going to look cinematic when it comes to things like YouTube. But if you want those really nice dramatic slow motion shots of waves crashing, boats moving, or water splashing around rocks, then you really need to switch over to 4K at 60 frames a second. That way you can slow the footage down in editing, and you will get a lot of nice cinematic movement. But this is important. Don't film everything in 60 frames a second. Now, a lot of people will do that and then wonder why everything feels more video gamey and less cinematic. So for normal, maybe everyday flying, I would just stick to the more usual of 30 frames a second in 4K. Now, the next thing you want to look at is shutter speed. And again, this is where a lot of people go wrong. So one thing you need to do is really fly in manual mode, and you want to fly using the 180 rule. And again, this sounds a bit more complicated, but it isn't really. It's just a matter that you want to set your exposure to twice that of your frame rate. So if you are using 30 frames a second, you need to be shooting in 1/60th of a second. And likewise, if you're shooting at 60 frames a second, then you want to be shooting in exposure of 1/20th of a second. And that's going to give you more natural motion blur. Now, when you are filming using the 180 rule and manual settings, you need to reduce the amount of light coming in. So you need to use ND filters, and these are the pack I've got from Freewell. Now, I'm not sponsored in any way. These are just the ones that I find the best. They're actually for the flip, it says on the box, but they fit on the Lito because they use the same camera. So everybody says that using the ND filters are like sunglasses for your drone. So basically they just reduce the amount of light you get hit the sensor, so you can get that nice slow shutter speed. You can also get ones which have got a polarization effect, and that's going to reduce any glare you got coming off the surface of the water, especially around things like midday. So just as a rough guide, if it's a bright summer sun, you may want to use something like an ND32. If it's ridiculously bright and it's proper beach weather, really tropical, exactly like it is in South Wales, as I said, 365 days a year, then you may want to go up to an ND64. If it's slightly cloudy, maybe an 8 or an ND16 will be enough for you to use. But using ND filters will dramatically improve your footage. Now, if you are filming in Pro mode, you really need to look at the color profile as well. So you want to be shooting in D-Log-M, and that's going to give you a flatter color profile, allowing you to color grade later. You don't have to do this if you don't want. You're still going to get some really great footage, but it just means that you are going to have more flexibility later on should you want to go in and adjust any of the colors or the highlights or the shadows of your footage. But I wouldn't worry about it too much. It's going to improve it, yes, but it's not a game changer if you decide just to shoot in the normal color profile. The next feature you need to look at if you're shooting in Pro mode is going to be the ISO, and you need to keep this as low as possible, maybe 100 to 200. Try not to go over 400 if you can avoid it, and this is because the water already creates lots of contrast and visual noise, and using a higher ISO is just going to make everything look a lot messier, especially if you've got darker cloudy water and not crystal blue tropical waters like I've got here. Then you're going to have the white balance, and don't leave this on auto. Really, you do need to set the white balance, and this is because when the drone sees the sea, it's going to be constantly changing due to reflections. You're going to have different brightnesses, you're going to have the clouds moving across the water, and your footage can suddenly change every few seconds. One clip is going to look warm, one clip is going to look cold, and it's going to totally ruin your footage. Then it also means that you could have one clip looking blue, the next looking more greenish, and editing will just become a nightmare. So instead, lock it in manually. On a sunny summer's day, as I said, like I've got today, you need to be looking at maybe 5600 to 6000 Kelvin. For golden hour, maybe 6500 to 7000 Kelvin. But your footage is going to look much more professional instantly if you do lock in that white balance. Then going slightly back to the ND filters and exposure, you want to get your footage slightly underexposed. So if possible, try and set it to -0.3 or -0.7. And this is because that the water reflections can blow out the highlights very quickly. And once the highlights are gone, they're gone forever. Whereas if you've got something which is a bit underexposed and you've got more shadows, you can always bring those shadows up later. You can't magically recover any details from pure white water. So in a nutshell, if you are filming in a coastal paradise like it is here, with a tropical sun, you want to be looking at using 4K at 30 frames a second, 1/60th is the shutter speed, ISO of 100, your white balance locked in at around about 5600, using your D-Log-M color profile, and try and get your exposure to -0.3 or -0.7, and that should give you some excellent results when you are out filming. Now there are one or two last things you need to consider, because there's a lot more to having good footage than having the perfect settings. So if you are flying over water, you need to, as I said earlier, fly slowly, have smooth stick movements, maybe using cruise control, fly more parallel to the coastline, and keep foreground interest such as rocks or cliffs or boats, that type of thing. Always keep the drone moving, never ever hover above the water, because that's going to be a big mistake. And then especially don't fly out miles to sea. You know, at the time you may think it feels dramatic and looks amazing with the controller on the screen, but when you get back and you watch it later, you just realize you're just going to have 5 minutes of water. So as I said, stay closer to the shore, because it's always going to give you better footage. And one final tip is keep the horizon level. Nothing screams beginner drone footage faster than having a wonky sea horizon. So the one thing you can always do to get your footage looking much more professional is to keep that horizon level. And then for the cinematic side of it, a lot of these will overlap. So again, as I said, you want to keep the sideways tracking shots, fly parallel to the shore, and keep the altitude steady. Try and avoid any sudden drops. Use ND filters if you can to get smoother motion blur. Again, shooting maybe in the golden hour will improve it as well. and keep the drone moving. Never ever stop above water. If you hover, do it higher up, and always keep an eye on the altitude. And the battery will drain faster than you think. So just remember that flying over water is completely different to flying over land, and you do need to treat it differently. And if you do take into account some of the things I've said in this video, it is going to dramatically reduce the chances of you losing your drone. Anyway, that's flying over water done. If you did find it useful, if you could do the like, subscribe, notification bell and all that stuff. As I said earlier, there's an option there for buy me a coffee. Anything I get from that is going to go back into the channel. If you've got any questions in relation to the DJI Lito, the DJI Lito X1, the Mini 4 Pro, the Mini 5 Pro, the Neo 1, the Neo 2, the Hover X1 Pro, Pro Max, or any of the Potensic drones, also let me know in the comments below. And if there's anything you want to see, I'll do my best to help you out. And I'll catch you again in a few days' time, and thanks for watching.